Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this edition of Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon in Seoul. Let's get started with a look at the day's highlights. Korea's current account surplus dropped nearly 7% last year, and the government may be looking to further reduce it out of concerns about the local currency. Ever since taking office last month, U.S. President Donald Trump has signed numerous executive orders to live up to his election pledges. So what's next on his list of protectionist moves? We have these stories and more coming right up. Korea's current account surplus shrank in 2016 from the year before, but still remained in record territory. But it could shrink further as the government has suggested it will further reduce its surplus over concerns that it could be labeled as a currency manipulator. Our Kim Min-ji starts us off.
Korea's current account surplus narrowed last year. According to preliminary data from the Bank of Korea, the country logged a surplus of nearly $98.7 billion. That's down about 7% from a year earlier, but is still the second biggest surplus on record after the $105.9 billion posted in 2015. Last year's figure was driven by a strong goods account surplus, which came to over $120 billion. This was due mainly to improved terms of trade on weak global oil prices. Exports fell 5.7% in 2016 from the year before, while imports were down 7%. However, the service balance remained in the red, posting a record high deficit of $17.6 billion, pulled down by losses in the transportation and travel balances. The central bank data comes after Korea's Finance Minister Yoo Il-do said Thursday that the country would narrow its current account surplus, apparently out of concern that the U.S. could label it a currency manipulator. One of the conditions Washington uses to gauge unfair currency practices is whether a country's current account surplus is larger than 3% of its GDP. Korea's trade surplus with America also tops $20 billion yearly, which is another condition listed by the U.S. Treasury Department. Seoul is currently on a monitoring list, and its currency practices will be reviewed again by Washington in April. Recently, U.S. President Donald Trump said Japan and China were playing the money market, essentially labeling them as currency manipulators, raising concerns that Korea could be next. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
Korea's foreign exchange reserves rose for the first time in 4 months in January on the back of the weakening U.S. dollar. The Bank of Korea says reserves reached some $374 billion as of the end of January, up around $3 billion from the previous month. The rebound comes after 3 straight months of decline. Now, the rise in January is mainly attributed to the weakened greenback, pushing up the value of non-dollar currencies. As of the end of December, Korea was the world's 8th largest holder of FX reserves. China topped the list with over $3.1 trillion, followed by Japan and Switzerland. And moving on to markets, to give us a wrap-up of this week's stock market action, we have our Business Daily's markets contributor, Choi Jin-seok, joining us on the phone today. Hello, Jin-seok.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so as we close the week, how are things looking on the last day of trading?
The Korean equity market mostly fell during the last session of the week. The Kospi, though, rebounded by 0.1% to close at 2073.16, while the Kosdaq fell by 0.6% to close at 609.21. Due to political uncertainty both from home and overseas, overall sentiment throughout the market was sluggish. Investors also need a selective strategy focusing on individual companies that have been experiencing an earnings rebound. On the Kospi market, retail investors who bought massive amounts of shares limited further declines of the index.
Then how was the overall weekly performance? I mean, in general, foreign investors who sold massive amounts of shares dragged down the Korean market.
On a weekly basis, both the Kospi and the Kosdaq market dropped by around 0.5%. As we said, foreigners sold about $200 million worth of stock on the Kospi market, and retail investors were the only net buyer this week. U.S. President Donald Trump's signing of an executive order temporarily restricting immigration from 7 Muslim-majority countries was blamed for the so-called risk-off reaction across global financial markets. And this negatively affected sentiment among foreign investors in the Korean market. However, robust export numbers helped limit further declines in the market.
And the value of U.S. dollar is expected to weaken going forward. So what sectors might be attractive under such circumstances?
The U.S. Federal Reserve, or the Fed, kept its benchmark interest rate during its first FOMC meeting under Trump. The Fed also signaled that it will not be easy for the central bank to raise interest rates further anytime soon. Along with that, Trump's America First initiative is expected to drag down the value of U.S. dollar even further. In this regard, experts recommend energy and materials because dollar depreciation can lead to rising commodity prices. Experts also see sentiment in the food and beverage sector getting a boost due to expectations for an earnings rebound. This has been Choi Jin-seok for Business Daily.
Samsung Electronics is said to be considering building a new factory in the United States for its home appliance business. This is according to Reuters, who cited a source familiar with the matter but did not want to be identified. Now, the source did not elaborate on where Samsung might build a plant or how much it might invest in it. The Korean tech giant wouldn't confirm the report, only saying that it continues to evaluate new investment needs in the U.S. Now, reacting to the report, U.S. President Donald Trump tweeted, "Thank you, Samsung. We would love to have you." If Samsung's plan becomes reality, it would join an array of global corporations that have pledged to invest in the United States in response to Trump's demand for more manufacturing at home. Korea is working to become a global powerhouse in the biosector, having substantially increased the year's budget for research and development activities in the field. The Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning says a total of about $275 million will be injected this year, up 31% from last year. Of the total, the lion's share will be allocated to the development of key technologies, including new medicine and stem cell research. The ministry said it will also encourage greater creativity among scientists by simplifying the application procedures for research funding. Now, this comes as Korea's biopharmaceutical exports reached roughly $1.4 billion last year, while the global biotech market is projected to grow to $414 billion this year. When Chinese companies treat their clients and employees to an incentive holiday, Korea has been the place to go for many of them. But recently, with growing tensions between the two countries over the deployment of a U.S. missile defense system THAAD on the Korean peninsula, we might be seeing a big drop in the number of incentive tourists from China this year. Our Oh Soo-young tells us more.
Feast of Chicken and Beer, inspired by the popular Korean drama My Love from the Star, have been a hit with Chinese companies, bringing massive numbers of employees to Korea as part of incentive holiday packages. But with an anticipated decline in the number of Chinese incentive tourists on the horizon, 치맥파티s on the same scale could soon be on hold. Some 130,000 employees of Chinese corporations visited Korea last year, often thousands at a time, making up roughly 60% of Korea's incentive tourism industry. However, the Korea Tourism Organization says that with Beijing's opposition to Seoul's decision to deploy an American missile defense system on its soil, the resulting fallout is likely to wipe out the number of incentive tourists from China by 20% from last year. At the same time, however, the number of incentive tourists from Southeast Asian countries is expected to grow to 160,000 this year, a 20% increase from 2016. Some 1,100 employees from an Indonesian cosmetics giant are making a visit this month. And in March, upwards of 800 incentive tourists from a Singaporean nutrition company will vacation in Korea. To accommodate the recent change in tourism dynamics, Korea is looking to diversify its incentive holidays program by shifting away from the kinds of mega-scale events that were designed for large groups of Chinese clients. The KTO said it will work to develop distinctive marketing strategies and customized programs to attract tourists from Southeast Asia, Japan, the Middle East and the Americas. Oh Soo-young, Business Daily.
Time now for a look at some major global stories from the week, and we're now joined by Eunice Kim. Hello, Eunice.
Hello.
So we've discussed the concerns arising here in Korea due to the new Trump administration, but for those in America, it's been an intense couple of weeks into Trump's presidency.
It really has, hasn't it, to you? And some are wondering if this has been a negotiating tactic of the former billionaire businessman. President Trump has not been shy to ruffle feathers as his executive actions on a border wall with Mexico and an immigration blockade showed he was moving quickly to make good on those campaign promises. Take a look.
Monday on Wall Street. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 all clocked their worst daily drops in weeks, marking a turnaround from the Trump bullishness seen since his election victory. The VIX, also known as the fear gauge, swung up to 11.88 and continued its up and down trajectory throughout the week, reflecting emerging doubts about the new U.S. leader's depth and focus in governance. This rethink came as U.S. President Donald Trump swiftly and fiercely signed a record 14 executive orders in his first week in office, including actions on a border wall with Mexico and on immigration that injected chaos at the nation's airports. The order that suspended America's Syrian refugee program indefinitely and blocked entry of travelers from 7 Muslim-majority countries for a minimum 90 days was implemented within hours. Even people with U.S. residency visas returning home were blocked. Lawmakers fiercely opposed the move at the airports.
I am begging you to go and revisit this. It's ill-advised, it's mean-spirited, it's tearing families apart, and that is not who we are. It will undermine the cooperation and collaboration that we need from Muslim countries to fight terrorism. It is wrong, and we will fight it today and every single day.
Airline stocks fell. The optics of a U.S. leadership apparently beginning to raise walls on the outside world has sparked protests both inside and outside of the U.S. Heads of major companies publicly defended the value of diversity and immigration, for Ford in an open letter, and Starbucks by announcing it would hire 10,000 refugees. Tech companies, including Microsoft, Apple, and Facebook, are drafting an open joint letter to President Trump, explaining their opposition to his travel ban. And then there's a question of Mexico, where many global companies, including Korea's Samsung, LG, and Kia Motors, have factories and ship their products into the U.S. via the NAFTA deal. Trump's planned meeting with his Mexican counterpart, President Enrique Peña Nieto, was canceled after he insisted that Mexico pay for that multi-billion-dollar new wall, a campaign promise. Australia's leader, on whom the U.S. president had reportedly angrily hung up on, kept a cool public face, promising his country would move forward on trade, with or without the U.S.
In communities across our nation are benefiting from these opportunities. And that is why, although disappointed by America's withdrawal from the TPP, we continue to work to open more markets for our exports, with negotiations underway with India, Indonesia, the European Union, and in due course, the United Kingdom.
Well, definitely looks like a rough couple of weeks for President Trump, even as his cabinet is still being approved. So where do we stand on his confirmations?
Right. So Secretary of State nominee Rex Tillerson, his Senate approval just came in on Wednesday local time. That's Thursday Korea time, with a vote of 56 for and 43 against. You'll remember the longtime ExxonMobil CEO is under scrutiny for his close relations with Russia and President Vladimir Putin, but now he is on the job as America's top diplomat. As he finds his bearings, Trump's Defense Secretary James Mattis was in Korea last night and Japan today to ensure that their military alliance remains strong amid the nuclear threat from North Korea. Now, Trump's Treasury Secretary pick Steve Mnuchin and Commerce Secretary pick Wilbur Ross, two individuals we are watching closely, still awaiting their confirmations. Meanwhile, on the currency market, the dollar spot index, which pits it against a basket of currencies, took a nosedive in the month of January, recording its worst month since March. The U.S. currency has also been falling against the Korean won this week, weakening by 41. That's about 3.4%.
Oh, wow. Well, let's head over to the UK, where Prime Minister Theresa May overcame a big hurdle at the legislature, where lawmakers voted to back Brexit negotiations, right?
You're right. And this was an extra process that was inserted when the UK Supreme Court had ruled Prime Minister May needed to get parliamentary approval in order to go forward and trigger Brexit. And she had that majority backing of 498 MPs earlier this week, but the process not completely over, as the bill still needs to undergo more scrutiny in the Commons and House of Lords before it becomes law. Meanwhile, we'll turn over to the Bank of England. It held its first monetary meeting of the year, and on Thursday, it announced a noticeably upgraded growth forecast for 2017 of 2%. That is up from 1.4% forecast that had come in November and another 0.8% forecast that had come back in August. So interest rates were kept at the record low rate of 0.25% with no changes in monetary policy for now.
So I guess things are looking up for Britain as well. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Absolutely.
And that wraps it up for today and this week. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll be back next week with more at the same time, same place for your Business Daily. Until then, goodbye.